Time now to check in with the Last Word author. His name is C.B. Liddell. Hello, C.B.
Hi, Kong.
We've talked before.
Yes.
Always good to have you with us in the Metpod.
It's nice to be back.
Well, your Last Word essay this time is all about Peaceniks in Japan. And you wrote there are a few blemishes on Japan's whiter-than-white reputation. What do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, I'm focusing on the peace movement in Japan, but also this applies to peace movements around the world and other countries too. And about Japan's whiter-than-white reputation, well, Japan, as everybody knows, it has a pacifist constitution. You know, there's a certain amount of moral capital that they accrue from that, from being seen as a peaceful nation. And it's just a very stark contrast with what happened before in the past, talking about World War II there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think many of the other nearby Asian countries view Japan as a peaceful nation.
No, that's because their memories go back a little bit longer than perhaps some people in the West.
Would you care to elaborate on some of the things you're talking about?
Well, yes. The main point I'm making is that Japan has been forced into a position by history of being dependent on the USA militarily, having this pacifist constitution, and they've tried to turn it to their own advantage diplomatically to kind of create a certain amount of moral capital. The peace movement in Japan sort of plays into that, I think. That's basically what it's about.
Well, you touched on the fact that neighboring countries don't necessarily view Japan as a pacifist nation. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Obviously, countries that experienced some of the events of World War II and the period before that in Asia, they obviously find it a lot harder to forget about the history. For them, history is much more real.
What's the deal with the Prime Minister still visiting the Yasukuni Shrine?
Well, it depends on the Prime Minister. Some Prime Ministers do and some don't. And then, obviously, if it depends on how long they stay around as well, because some of them are only here for a few months. And, I'm not really criticizing that. There are other reasons why, people might visit the Yasukuni Shrine. It doesn't actually mean that the person visiting the shrine is endorsing the war criminals who are enshrined there. In many cases, it's an attempt to simply appease the unquiet spirits of the dead. It's not really making a moral judgment in a way, although in a very kind of politically charged realm of East Asian history, it's usually interpreted that way by the Chinese government or the Koreans.
But there are many just normal soldiers buried there as well, right?
Yeah, there's kids as well, children that were sunk by American submarines, when they were leaving Okinawa. Several million people are enshrined there. There's actually also, I think, about 20 or 30,000 Koreans who are enshrined at Yasukuni Shrine. So the article's not really about Yasukuni. It's more about the way that the peace movement in Japan has this very abstract and fuzzy notion of peace, kind of, fetishizes the idea of peace. That doesn't produce any positive results, in my opinion. In fact, it might do the opposite.
How so?
War, obviously, is a bad thing. You could say other things are negative, too. For example, disease, illness, poverty, those kind of things are also negatives. Now, in the case of disease, instead of having a big feel-good movement of people going around coining slogans and having speeches, we actually have doctors in laboratories working hard to find cures for specific illnesses. So there's a very practical attempt to deal with the problem. Now, with war, it's quite different. Well, you have the peace movement. Basically, they seem to spend most of their time just emoting and creating feel-good slogans.
Give peace a chance.
Yeah, give peace a chance, for example. So it's all very abstract and generalized, and the big point there is, does it actually do any good? And if so, how could it do any good? I think that's completely ineffectual, because the reason people have wars is not really because they like war although it is possible to find some people who probably, do get off on it.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, those people are a very tiny minority. And the real reason wars happen, it's always for specific, local, practical reasons. So, like, there's an economic problem, or there's a border dispute, or there's an ethnic tension between two groups.
Sure.
This kind of abstract, fuzzy, generalized notion of war is evil and peace is lovely and let's all live in peace and harmony, that doesn't really apply to that kind of micro level. Instead of studying and checking the history and the economics and doing all the other stuff that you need to do to solve that problem, you just have this abstract, fuzzy notion of peace.
So then, are you saying that the speeches at Hiroshima every year and the releasing of all the doves and all the paper cranes, that's not doing anything?
Probably making some people feel a bit pleased with themselves, like, look what a nice moral person I am. I'm supporting the peace movement. So I think the real role is to give people a kind of a false sense of worth. All right, thank you, Colin.
Thank you very much. There you go. That's all the time we have for this week's Tokyo Metpod.